She was 12 years old, homeless, invisible. Most nights she slept behind a market stall with nothing but a torn wrapper and memories of her mother's laughter. No one noticed when she walked past. No one cared where she slept. No one expected her to change anything. Until the day she slipped through a broken palace gate. She wasn't looking for trouble. She wasn't looking for riches. She had just seen a boy in a wheelchair sitting alone in a royal garden, and she recognized the sadness on his face. Because she had worn that same sadness the day her mother died. So she did the only thing she knew how to do. She danced. Barefoot, untrained, unashamed. She danced the way her mother used to dance when hunger made her cry. She danced like joy was something you could fight for. She danced like pain didn't get the final word. She didn't know the boy was a prince. She didn't know the king was watching from the castle window. She didn't know the entire kingdom had been mourning since the accident that took the queen and left the prince unable to walk. All she knew was this. He looked lonely. And sometimes loneliness just needs someone brave enough to step inside it. What happened next would leave the king in tears, shock the palace guards, and change the life of a forgotten orphan forever. Because the day a homeless girl chose to dance in the middle of someone else's grief was the day a broken prince remembered how to stand. Ada was 12 years old, but the world had not been gentle enough to let her feel like a child. Most nights she slept behind the market stalls, curled beside wooden crates that still smelled faintly of tomatoes and pepper. When the traders packed up and went home, when the shouting and bargaining faded into distant echoes, that was when Ada found her corner. She always chose the same spot, between Mama Nkechi's abandoned banana stand and the cracked cement wall near the gutter. It wasn't comfortable, but it was hidden enough that drunk men and roaming boys rarely noticed her. She had learned early that invisibility was safety. Her bed was a flattened carton box. Her pillow was a rolled wrapper. Her blanket was hope that the night wouldn't rain. Sometimes it did. And when it did, she would scramble under the wooden table, clutching the faded blue wrapper that had once belonged to her mother. It was the only thing she had left of her. It still smelled faintly like soap. On good mornings, kind traders would toss her bruised fruits or stale bread. "Take Ada," Mama Nkechi would mutter without looking at her directly, as if pretending not to notice the girl's thin wrists or oversized eyes. "Before I change my mind." Ada always smiled wide and bowed dramatically. "Thank you, Queen of Bananas," she would declare. Mama Nkechi would try not to laugh. Ada had learned something important after her mother died. If she stopped smiling, people became uncomfortable. And when people became uncomfortable, they stopped helping. So she smiled. Even when her stomach growled. Even when other children pointed. Plus even when she woke from dreams where her mother was still alive. Her mother had been small but fierce, with a laugh that could chase sadness out of a room. They had lived in a one-room house at the edge of the city. The roof leaked and the door didn't close properly, but it had been theirs. On the worst days when there was no food and no money and no electricity, her mother would clap her hands suddenly. "Stand up," she would command. Ada would groan. "Mama, stand up." And then her mother would dance. Not gently, not politely. She would spin, shake her shoulders, stomp her feet, wiggle her hips like a village masquerade performer. She would sing off-key and make exaggerated faces until Ada burst into helpless laughter. "Smile first," her mother would say, cupping Ada's cheeks. "Joy comes after." Ada had believed her. Until the coughing started. First it was small. Then it grew louder. Longer. Deeper. The medicine man came once. Then twice. Then not at all. One morning, Ada woke up and the room was too quiet. The kind of quiet that doesn't go away. After that, everything fell apart quickly. The landlord came. The shouting started. The door was locked behind her. And just like that, Ada belonged to the streets. On the afternoon it happened, Ada hadn't planned to go anywhere special. She was just walking. Sometimes when hunger made her restless, she walked. Past the bus stop where conductors shouted destinations. Past the bakery that made her mouth water. Past the shiny shops where mannequins wore dresses that cost more than she could imagine. She walked because standing still made her think too much. That day the sky was wide and bright. The sun warmed her shoulders. Her feet were dusty but she didn't care. She followed a road she had never taken before. The houses began to change. Small concrete buildings became taller ones. The streets became cleaner. The air even smelled different, Less smoke, more flowers. Ada slowed. She felt like she had stepped into another world. And then she saw it. The palace. It rose high and white against the sky, its golden gates gleaming like something from a storybook. The walls were tall, guarded by men in crisp uniforms who stood straight and serious. Ada had heard about the palace before, of course. Everyone had. But seeing it up close was something else. She stood across the road, barefoot and dusty, staring. People walked past her, but she didn't notice. Her eyes were drawn to the garden beyond the gate. Bright flowers. Green grass trimmed perfectly. A fountain sparkling in the sunlight. It looked like a dream. And then, she saw him. A boy sat in the garden, facing the fountain. He looked about her age, maybe a little older. He wore neat clothes, polished shoes, and his hair was carefully trimmed. He sat in a wheelchair. But that wasn't what caught her attention. It was his face. He wasn't crying. He wasn't angry. He was just empty. The kind of empty that swallows sound. Ada felt her breath catch. She knew that look. She had worn it the morning her mother didn't wake up. She had worn it the first night she slept outside. She had worn it when she realized no one was coming to save her. That face, she whispered. Her chest tightened, not with fear, but with recognition. He looked lonely. And loneliness, Ada understood very well. Without thinking too hard, she moved closer to the gate. The guards were stationed near the main entrance, speaking quietly to each other. They didn't notice the thin girl lingering along the side. Ada walked slowly along the fence, her fingers brushing the cool metal. Then she saw it. Near the bottom of the gate, where time and pressure had bent the bars slightly, there was a small gap. Not large. Not obvious. But large enough. She crouched. Her heart began to pound loudly in her ears. She was caught. She could be beaten. Arrested. Thrown out roughly. But when she looked again at the boy's still face, she made her choice. I know that look, she whispered to herself. And quietly, carefully, Ada slid through the opening. Her dress caught on the metal and tore slightly, but she didn't stop. She wriggled through until she landed softly on the other side. Inside the palace garden. The grass felt different under her feet, cool, soft, almost unreal. For a moment she just stood there. Then she looked up. The boy hadn't seen her yet. He was still staring at the fountain. Still wearing that heavy silence. Ada brushed the dust from her knees. She didn't know his name. She didn't know he was royalty. She didn't know she was about to change her life forever. All she knew was this. Somebody had once danced for her when she needed it most. Maybe. Just maybe. It was her turn now. The palace garden was quieter than Ada expected. Not the noisy quiet of the market at dawn. Not the restless quiet of night streets. This was soft quiet. The kind that wrapped around you. The grass felt cool beneath her dusty feet. Tiny white flowers lined the stone path, and the fountain in the center whispered as water spilled gently from one carved bowl into another. Everything was beautiful. Everything except the boy. He sat with his back slightly curved, hands resting loosely on his lap. The wheelchair gleamed in the sunlight. Polished, expensive, carefully made. But his eyes were far away. He looked like someone who was there in body but not in spirit. Ada swallowed. For a second, doubt flickered inside her. What if he shouted? What if he called the guards? What if she ruined everything? But then she remembered the mornings her mother had danced even when she herself was tired and sick. Bravery didn't mean you weren't scared. It meant you moved anyway. So Ada stepped forward. You look like someone stole your favorite toy, she said softly. The boy startled. His head turned sharply, dark eyes widening as they landed on her. For a moment he just stared. At her bare feet, her torn dress, her wild hair. Who are you? He demanded. His voice wasn't loud, but it was sharp. Defensive. I'm Ada, she replied simply. You shouldn't be here. Maybe, she said with a shrug. But you shouldn't look like that. His eyebrows pulled together. Like what? Like you forgot how to be happy. Something flickered in his expression. Annoyance. Hurt. Maybe both. You don't know anything about me. Ada crossed her arms. I know that face. Silence stretched between them. The fountain continued its gentle song. He looked away first. My mama used to make that face when she was worried, Ada continued carefully. And I made that face when, her voice faltered slightly, when she stopped waking up. The boy's eyes snapped back to hers. The sharpness in his posture softened just a little. My mother died too, he said quietly. The words landed heavy between them. Ada's chest tightened. Oh. He nodded once, stiffly. She died in the accident. What accident? He looked down at his legs. Ada followed his gaze. The expensive trousers. The stillness. The silence in his body. My father's carriage lost control, he said flatly. The horses panicked. We crashed. His fingers curled slightly on his lap. She didn't survive. Ada didn't know what to say, so she told the truth. That's not fair. His lips pressed together. No, he whispered. It isn't. They sat there in shared understanding for a moment. Two children from completely different worlds. Connected by loss. Connected by that same empty look. What's your name? Ada asked gently. He hesitated. Obina. It's a strong name, she said. He didn't answer. The wind shifted lightly, carrying the scent of roses. After a moment, Ada tilted her head at him. So, is this what you do every day? What? Sit. Stare. Practice being a statue? His eyes widened slightly. I'm not practicing. You're very good at it. For the first time, the corner of his mouth twitched. Just slightly. Ada noticed immediately. There it is. She stepped back, planted her feet wide, and clapped once. The sharp sound echoed softly across the garden. Obina blinked. What are you doing? When I was sad, she said, lifting her chin proudly, my mama would dance. Dance. She said joy sometimes needs help. He stared at her like she had grown a second head. Ada didn't wait for permission. She began. At first it was small, shoulder shimmies, playful foot taps, exaggerated spins that made her nearly trip over herself. Then she leaned into it fully. She bent low and pretended to sneak like a cat. She flapped her arms like a confused bird. She stomped dramatically like a village chief. Her face twisted into ridiculous expressions. Obina tried not to react. He pressed his lips together tightly. Ada danced closer. Why do you look like someone swallowed bitter leaf? She teased. I do not. You do. She pretended to trip and fell onto the grass with an overly dramatic gasp. Oh no. The mighty dancer has fallen. Silence. A small sound escaped him. A breath that wasn't quite serious. Ada popped back up and spun wildly. You laughed. I did not. You did. He covered his mouth, but it was too late. The laughter broke free. Soft at first. Then real. His shoulders shook. Ada grinned so wide her cheeks hurt. There it is, she shouted triumphantly. I knew you still had it. Obina shook his head, laughing helplessly now. You look ridiculous. You look alive, she shot back. He began clapping, awkwardly at first, then more confidently. Each clap sounded like a victory. Ada danced harder. For those few minutes, he wasn't the boy who had lost his mother. He wasn't the boy who couldn't walk. He wasn't trapped inside grief. He was just a child, laughing. Above them, in the tall window of the palace, unseen by either of them, a man stood frozen. Ding. He had been walking past the corridor when he heard something unfamiliar echo through the halls. Laughter. Not polite chuckles. Not forced smiles. Real laughter. He stepped toward the window slowly, afraid the sound might disappear if he moved too quickly. And there, in the garden, he saw it. His son. Clapping. Smiling. Laughing like he used to before that terrible day. And beside him, a thin barefoot girl in a torn dress dancing like sunlight had taken human form. The king gripped the edge of the window frame. He hadn't seen Obina laugh like that in months. Doctors had come and gone. Therapists had tried. Musicians had played. Nothing had reached him. Till now. Until this child who looked like she belonged nowhere near palace walls. Back in the garden, Ada was breathing hard from dancing. She stopped and bent forward dramatically, pretending to pant. I accept applause in the form of snacks, she declared. Obina laughed again. You are very strange. Thank you. That wasn't a compliment. I'll take it anyway. For the first time in months, Obina didn't feel the weight pressing so heavily on his chest. He looked at her differently now. Not as an intruder. Not as a street child. But as something unexpected. Something warm. You can come again, he said suddenly. Ada froze. Really? Yes. She hesitated. You won't tell the guards? He considered it, then shook his head. No. Ada smiled softer this time. Not the practiced smile she showed the market. Not the brave smile she wore at night. This one was real. Okay, she said. And as the sun dipped lower in the sky, the garden felt lighter than it had in a very long time. 2 children sat by the fountain. One had lost everything. The other had lost almost everything. But for the first time since the accident, Obinna had remembered something. He remembered how it felt to laugh. The laughter lingered long after it faded. The king remained at the window long after the children had settled back into quiet conversation. He didn't move. He was afraid if he blinked too hard, the moment would vanish. For months, the palace had been heavy, silent. Even the servants spoke in hushed tones, as if grief were a fragile object that might shatter if disturbed. Since the accident, everything had changed. The queen had been the light of the palace, gentle but firm, warm but wise. She had balanced the king's stern nature. She had filled the halls with music, festivals, laughter. And Obinna, his son, had once run through these gardens with unstoppable energy. Climbed trees he wasn't supposed to. Chased butterflies like they owed him money. Then the carriage overturned. In one terrible afternoon the king lost his wife, and almost lost his son. Obinna survived. But he returned to the palace in silence. The doctors did their work. The healers tried their herbs. Foreign specialists were flown in. His legs did not respond. But what hurt the king most was not the wheelchair. It was the emptiness in his son's eyes. The way Obinna stopped asking questions, stopped laughing, stopped being a child. The palace had become a monument to loss. Until today. Until that girl. The king straightened slowly and turned from the window. Find out who she is, he ordered a nearby guard quietly. Yes, your majesty. And do not frighten her. Ada was mid-story when the shadow fell over her. She was telling Obinna about a goat that once chased her across the market when suddenly the sunlight disappeared. She looked up. Her heart dropped straight into her stomach. A tall man stood before her, dressed in royal robes trimmed with gold embroidery. His posture was strong. His expression unreadable. Obinna's face changed instantly. Father. Father. Ada's eyes widened. This wasn't just any man. This was the king. Her legs reacted before her brain did. She scrambled up and attempted something that might have been a bow if you squinted hard enough. I'm sorry, sir, she blurted out. I didn't steal anything. I just danced. The king studied her carefully. Up close she looked even smaller. Thinner. The fabric of her dress was worn nearly transparent in places. Her feet were bare and scratched. But her eyes were bright. You made my son laugh, the king said calmly. Ada blinked. Yes, sir. You trespassed. He swallowed. Yes, sir. You ignored palace guards. Yes, sir. You mocked my son's posture. Obinna tried to protest. Father. Ada raised her hands quickly. I didn't mean bad. He looked sad. The king's gaze shifted to his son. Obinna met it steadily. I wanted her to stay. The king paused. That alone was rare. Obinna had refused visitors, refused tutors, refused friends from neighboring kingdoms. But now he was defending this barefoot stranger. The king looked back at Ada. What is your name? Ada. Full name. She hesitated. I don't know my father's name. Something flickered in the king's expression. And your mother? Ada's throat tightened. She died. How long ago? A year. Where do you live? She hesitated longer this time. The garden suddenly felt too beautiful to tell the truth in. Outside, she said quietly. The king understood immediately. He had ruled long enough to recognize poverty when he saw it. You sleep on the streets? She lifted her chin slightly. I manage. The king felt something unfamiliar stir in his chest. Not pity. Respect. She didn't beg, she didn't cry. She didn't shrink. She stood there with dignity that many nobles lacked. Why did you enter my palace? He asked. Ada answered without hesitation. Because he looked lonely. The honesty hit harder than any rehearsed speech could have. Silence filled the garden. The fountain continued to murmur gently between them. Finally the king spoke. You may come back tomorrow. Ada blinked rapidly. Truly. Yes. She looked between father and son. And I won't be arrested? The king's lips almost curved. No. Obina grinned openly now. You have to come back, he insisted. You didn't even finish your goat story. Ada's heart pounded so loudly she thought they might hear it. You're serious? She asked the king again. I am not a man who jokes about invitations. She nodded quickly. I'll come. The king turned to leave but paused. Ada. He stiffened. Yes, sir. You will enter through the front gate tomorrow. Her eyes widened. Through the... But the guards will let you in. He began walking away. And Ada? Yes. Wear shoes if you can. She looked down at her feet. I'll try, sir. Ada didn't sleep much that night. She lay on her cardboard staring at the sky. The palace. The prince. King. It felt unreal. Part of her wondered if she had imagined it all. But the grass stains on her dress were real. The sound of Obina's laughter echoed in her ears. She smiled into the darkness. For the first time in a long time, tomorrow felt like something to look forward to. Inside the palace, the king sat alone in his study that evening. The room still held traces of the queen, her favorite books neatly arranged, her portrait above the fireplace. He looked at the painting. She made him laugh, he murmured quietly. If his wife had been alive, she would have noticed the girl's spirit instantly. She had always believed that healing sometimes came in unexpected forms. The king folded his hands thoughtfully. There was something about Ada. Something unpolished, untaught, unafraid. She had not treated Obina like glass. She had not pitted him. She had teased him, challenged him, made him respond. The king exhaled slowly. Prepare a simple meal for tomorrow, he instructed a servant later. And have the side gate cleared. For the street girl, your majesty? For my son's guest, he corrected. The next morning, Ada stood in front of the palace gates. Her heart was racing. She had found an old pair of mismatched sandals near the market and cleaned them as best she could. They were slightly too big, but they would do. She approached the guards cautiously. One of them looked down at her. You are Ada? Her mouth fell open. Yes. You may enter. Just like that. The massive gates opened. Not for a royal visitor. Not for a noble. But for a homeless girl who dared to dance. As Ada stepped inside properly for the first time, she felt something shift deep inside her. She wasn't just sneaking anymore. She was invited. And sometimes, the difference between an outsider and a guest is one open door. By the third week, Ada no longer felt like a trespasser. The palace had begun to adjust to her. At first, the servants watched her closely. She walked too freely, spoke too loudly, asked too many questions. Once she nearly knocked over a decorative vase because she had been trying to see her reflection in it. But something about her made it impossible to stay annoyed for long. She greeted everyone. Good morning, serious face. Why are you walking like you swallowed pepper? Does this palace have secret tunnels? Even the stiffest guards had begun hiding smiles. But the garden was still her favorite place. That was where Obina felt most like himself. The first few days after the king's invitation, Obina still stayed mostly in his wheelchair. He laughed more now, spoke more, pieced her back. But Ada noticed things others didn't. Sometimes when he thought she wasn't looking, he would stare at his legs with quiet frustration. His fingers would press against his knees as if willing them to respond. The doctors had said recovery would take time. The healers had said patience was needed. But Ada had grown up without the luxury of patience. When something broke in the market, you fixed it or you lost it. One afternoon, sunlight poured across the garden like melted gold. The fountains sparkled. Birds flitted between trees. Ada stood in front of Obina with her hands on her hips. You clap like an old man. I do not, he protested. You do. I clap perfectly fine. You clap like this. She demonstrated slow, stiff claps with a dramatic, bored expression. Obina burst into laughter. That is not how I clap. Oh. Then show me. He clapped faster. Still old, she declared. He rolled his eyes. You're impossible. And you're avoiding something. His laughter faded slightly. I'm not. You are. Silence settled. The air shifted. Ada softened her voice. You used to run, didn't you? His jaw tightened. Yes. What was it like? He looked away. Free. The word came out almost broken. Ada nodded slowly. My mama used to say something. He glanced at her. She said sometimes your body forgets what your heart remembers. He swallowed. My legs don't listen anymore. Maybe they're just scared. He frowned. Legs don't get scared. Mine do, she said matter-of-factly. When I stand in front of people to dance. You don't look scared. I am, she admitted. But I move anyway. He studied her carefully. Ada stepped back into the open space of the garden. Today, she announced boldly, you're not clapping. He raised an eyebrow. Oh. You're dancing. His face changed immediately. Ada. No. I can't. You don't know that. Yes, I do. She walked closer. You stand every day with the doctors. That's different. How? They hold me. I won't hold you. The honesty startled him. She extended her hand not to pull him up. Just to offer it. Dance with me. The wind moved softly through the trees. From inside the palace, the king was walking through the corridor when he heard the familiar rhythm of Ada's clapping echo through the open windows. He paused. Without fully knowing why, he stepped toward the window overlooking the garden. Below he saw them. Ada standing. Obina sitting. Facing each other like challengers. He stayed very still. Back in the garden, Obina's breathing had changed. His fingers gripped the armrests of his wheelchair. I'll fall, he whispered. Then we'll fall together, Ada replied lightly. She didn't pity him. She didn't lower her voice in that soft tone adults used when they thought he might break. She believed him capable. That difference mattered. He looked at her hand again. Then at his legs. Then at the fountain. Something shifted behind his eyes. Not anger. Not sadness. Determination. He leaned forward slowly. His arms trembled as he pushed himself upward. Ada's heart began pounding. He lifted slightly. And dropped back down. His breathing grew heavier. I told you, he muttered. Ada didn't move away. Again. He glared at her. You're bossy. Yes. He tried again. This time he pushed harder. His body rose halfway. Wobbled. Then. He was standing. Barely. But standing. Ada gasped softly but forced herself not to rush in. He swayed. His legs shook violently. The king's hands gripped the window frame so tightly his knuckles turned white. Obina looked terrified. Ada. Look at me, she said firmly. He did. Not at his legs. Not at the ground. At her. Now move. I can't. Yes, you can. He shifted his weight. One foot moved forward. Just a few inches. Felt like a mountain. Then the other. And suddenly, he wasn't just standing. He was stepping. The king felt his breath leave him. Below, Ada let out a joyful shout. You're doing it. Obina let out a sound that was half laugh, half sob. He took another step. Then another. And then, almost without thinking, he lifted his arms and tried to copy her shoulder shimmy. It was awkward. Uneven. Unsteady. But it was dancing. Ada burst into delighted laughter and joined him fully. They moved clumsily together in the golden sunlight. Two children. Free. Inside the palace window, the king's vision blurred. Tears slipped down his face before he realized they were there. Months of silence. Months of fear. No. Movement. Not forced by doctors. Not commanded by therapy. Inspired by joy. Obina didn't even realize how long he had been standing until his legs gave out and he stumbled. This time Ada caught him. They fell onto the grass together in a heap of laughter. You walked, she shouted. He stared at his legs in disbelief. I did. You danced. I danced, he repeated softly. Above them, the king stepped back from the window slowly. His chest felt too full. The grief was still there. The loss was still real. But for the first time since the accident, hope didn't feel like a fragile thing. It felt alive. And in the garden, as Ada and Obina lay on the grass laughing breathlessly, neither of them knew they had just changed everything. But they had. But sometimes, healing doesn't arrive in white coats or royal decrees. Sometimes it arrives barefoot and asks you to dance. That evening, Ada did not sneak out through the bent gate. For the first time since she had entered the palace grounds, she didn't feel like she had to escape before sunset. Because before she could even think about leaving, a royal guard approached her gently. His Majesty would like to see you. Ada froze. Her heart immediately began racing. Had she done something wrong? Had Obina's standing upset someone? Had she broken palace rules without knowing? Obina squeezed her hand. It's okay, he whispered. He won't be angry. She nodded, but her palms were sweaty. The palace corridors felt different at night. Softer lighting. Echoing footsteps. Walls lined with portraits of past rulers watching silently. Ada suddenly became aware of her torn dress. The grass stains. The dust on her ankles. She had danced in front of a prince. She had made him stand. And now she was walking toward the king. Instead of taking her directly to the king, the guards stopped outside a large room. 2 palace attendants waited there. For me? Ada asked cautiously. Yes, one woman replied kindly. You are to be prepared. Prepared for what? For dinner. Dinner? Ada blinked. Before she could protest, they gently led her inside. She had never seen a bathing room like that before. The water was warm. The soap smelled like flowers she couldn't name. When they poured water over her hair, she flinched at first, and used to such care. But slowly, she relaxed. The dirt of the streets washed away. The dust, the sweat, the smell of survival. When they handed her clean clothes, soft fabric the color of sunrise, Ada hesitated. I can't wear this, she whispered. Why not? It's too nice. The attendant smiled gently. It is meant for you. They brushed her hair, trimmed her nails, slipped sandals onto her feet that actually fit. When Ada finally looked at herself in the tall mirror, she didn't recognize the girl staring back. Like she belonged somewhere. Tears pricked her eyes unexpectedly. She hadn't realized how tired she was of looking like someone who didn't matter. When she was finally led into the king's study, her heart beat so loudly she thought it might echo off the high ceilings. Obina was already there. Standing. Not perfectly steady, but standing. He grinned when he saw her. You look different. So do you, she whispered back. The king stood near the large window, his hands clasped behind him. He turned slowly as Ada entered. For a long moment he said nothing. He studied her the same way he had the first day, but now she stood clean, calm, and uncertain. Ada, he said quietly. She bowed, this time properly. Yes, sir. Do you know what happened today? She glanced at Obina. He danced, she said simply. The king's voice thickened slightly. He stood. On his own. She nodded. Yes, sir. Do you understand what that means? Ada hesitated. It means, he remembered? The king's eyes softened. Yes. He stepped closer. 4 months, the best physicians could not reach him. The finest therapists tried and failed. But you. He paused. You treated him like a boy. Not a tragedy. Ada shifted uncomfortably. I just didn't like how sad he looked. Obina laughed softly. She called me a statue. The king almost smiled. You gave him something I could not. Ada blinked rapidly. I didn't mean to do something big, she said honestly. I just wanted him to feel less alone. Silence filled the room. The king studied her carefully. Ada, where will you sleep tonight? She hesitated. Outside. No. The word was firm. She looked startled. You will not. Her chest tightened. Sir, I don't want trouble. I can leave after dinner. You misunderstand me, the king said gently. He walked closer and did something no ruler had likely done in generations. He knelt before her so their eyes were level. You have no family, he said quietly. He swallowed. No, sir. You have no home. She shook her head. He glanced at Obina, who stood watching anxiously. And my son has no mother. The air shifted. Ada's breath caught. I cannot replace what you lost, the king continued. And you cannot replace what he lost. He paused. But perhaps, we do not need to replace. Ada's heart pounded. What are you saying, sir? I am asking, he said carefully, if you would like to stay here. She blinked. Stay, as what? The king's voice softened. As my daughter. The words hung in the air like something fragile and sacred. Ada's knees felt weak. She had imagined many things in her lonely nights behind the market. Food. Shoes. A bed. But not this. Not belonging. I don't have anything, she whispered. I don't know how to behave like palace people. I talk too much. I don't know which spoon is for what. Obina stepped forward slightly. I don't care about spoons. The king's lips curved faintly. We can teach you manners. We can teach you books. We can teach you anything that can be learned. He gently placed his hand over his chest. But kindness, courage, joy. He shook his head. Those cannot be taught. And you already have them. Ada's vision blurred. She thought of the market nights, the hunger, the fear, the way people looked through her. She thought of her mother spinning in their tiny room. Smile first. Joy comes after. Tears slid down her cheeks. If I stay, she whispered, I won't have to leave? No, the king said firmly. You won't change your mind? I do not make promises lightly. Obina reached for her hand. Please stay. That was it. That small, hopeful voice. Ada nodded, tears falling freely now. Yes. Obina let out a sound of relief and wrapped his arms around her tightly. The king stood slowly, emotion thick in his chest. Then it is settled. Ada did not sleep on cardboard. She slept in a bed so soft she was afraid to move too much. Her room had a window overlooking the same garden where everything had begun. There were folded clothes in a wardrobe, books on a small table, a candle glowing gently beside her bed. She lay on her back, staring at the ceiling. For the first time in a year she was not afraid of tomorrow. For the first time in a year she did not feel invisible. And somewhere in the palace, a king sat quietly in gratitude. And a prince slept peacefully, exhausted from standing and dancing. And in a room that once held only silence, a former homeless orphan girl whispered softly into the dark. Smile first. Because joy had finally come.